boarding. Major's coming. I've lost all sound, are you?
In the summer of 1995, the Prime Minister, John Major, decided that he'd had enough and put himself up for re-election.
What was intolerable was to go on with the party forming a circle and opening fire.
In short, it is time to put up or shut up.
The party had gone beyond hope and was not capable of having its divisions healed.
Now, John Major claims he was always a reluctant Prime Minister.
I never had a game plan. I was not sitting there thirsting to become Prime Minister.
I think he was a very, very strong man, tough as old boots. The strength of character is, I think, more remarkable given how easily hurt he can be and how socially vulnerable he is.
The woman he replaced, Margaret Thatcher, became his severest critic.
In retrospect, I suppose I can now say, I think her behaviour was intolerable.
Time and again, his leadership was questioned.
John Major was one of the nicest people ever to walk the hallowed halls of Westminster, and just the wrong person ever to be Prime Minister.
What happened behind the scenes can now be told. The struggle for power, the conflicts with colleagues, and the personal frustration and sense of failure which made John Major want to quit.
There were moments when one got very depressed. I certainly did. I was persuaded to stay, but I shall probably wonder to the end of my days whether that was the right decision.
Where you see the house ahead, with the two white arches, immediately opposite there, that is where we lived.
Shortly before the 1992 general election, John Major returned to his roots in Brixton to make an election broadcast.
It's still there. It's still there. It's hardly changed.
Our communications people had this brilliant idea that we should allow John to talk about his past, that we would be able to demonstrate how genuinely humble his upbringings were and how he'd triumphed over this social adversity. And there was then an attempt to sort of kit him out in Austin Reed's best, which threw him a bit. Don't think he'd ever had an Austin Reed label before. And then he was marched down to Brixton to do it and threw up. I mean, he hated it. He hated every minute of it.
John Major's reluctance to take part in the broadcast stemmed from a deep sensitivity about his past. He never wanted to make political capital out of his difficult boyhood in South London in the 1950s and his colourful parents. It was the start of a painful, even obsessive relationship with the press.
Some people would sneer in a patronising fashion at the fact that my father made garden ornaments for a living at one stage, or that he'd spent some time in the circus, or that he'd been a music hall artist. I must say that patronising sneering at two people who I knew were better than those who were sneering at them did strike home, and I freely confess it hurt. It gave me a contempt for the sneerers. I've no embarrassment about my parents.
This is Cold Harbour Lane, all these old houses with the basements down there. And the Enterprise...
The Prime Minister may have been so sensitive because there were many secrets in his family.
And that's the house we lived in for...
He was then only dimly aware that his father had many affairs and an extended family. In 1955, the near collapse of his business had forced the Majors to move to cheap lodgings in Cold Harbour Lane.
Our landlord at Brixton was not some casual landlord that my parents had found, finding somewhere for us to live. It was, in fact, my half-brother, who had been born just at the turn of the century. And then, perhaps even more surprisingly, I discovered that I had a half-sister who was still alive, who had been born in the 1920s. And I think it imbued in me a sense of tolerance for people who made mistakes that I learned directly from my own experience. You can make mistakes and do something extremely foolish, perhaps almost unforgivable, and still not be a bad person who should be dismissed. You're just human, and you've just made mistakes.
The landlord in Brixton was John Major's half-brother. He had a son, Tom, who became the constant companion and playmate of the young John Major.
He was special. He was full of energy, he was physically robust, he was bright. And I think what really distinguished him is that he was the only child I knew who could talk back to adults and get away with it.
It may have been this cheekiness which led to the young boy's precocious interest in politics.
I don't recall other kids of 12 years old sitting on the curb outside the candy store talking about politics, but that was the thing we did, and we were in short pants at the time. Whenever there was an election campaign, we discussed the candidates and the issues to the extent that we knew them.
John Major went to Rutlish, a grammar school which sought to emulate the public school system. To his great distress, his family insisted he register as John Major Ball. Major was his father's stage name, and Ball his father's original surname. Perhaps for this reason, or because of the family's descent into poverty, his progress at Rutlish was dismal. He left with only 3 O-levels, a fact he kept secret for many years.
My parents always hoped and expected a great deal of me. And when they were alive, I didn't deliver any of that. For a range of circumstances, I never settled down at the school. I didn't like the school. I didn't work at the school. I wasn't a particular troublemaker, but I was pretty alienated from the system there. And I left school with a miserable academic record that must, given their expectations, have been quite heartbreaking for them. And through sheer idleness and disinterest and a determination almost not to conform at school, I let them down. And when I went home with those dreadful examination failures, when they knew I should have passed and I knew I should have passed, even then there was no reproach. You could see the hurt at the failure, but there was no reproach. And I realized then that I just had to do better in future.
The combination of an unconventional family, an elderly and infirm father, and above all his own lack of formal education, left an indelible mark on John Major, and would be the spur which drove him from Cold Harbour Lane to Downing Street.
Someone who is, by birth and upbringing, an outsider, who, so to speak, peers through the fence at the children playing on the other side, feels at the same time rather excluded, and also at the same time perhaps a burning ambition to show them what he can do, to be respected by them.
And I think as it transpired, it was only this vision he had of getting involved in politics, which somehow lifted him out of the mire at that time.
As a young man, John Major's passionate desire for self-advancement found a home in the Young Conservatives. It was then that he became a soapbox orator outside Party HQ in Brixton. For 6 years, he had a relationship with Jean Kierans, a divorced woman 13 years his senior. She helped him grow in confidence and maturity. John Major was elected a Lambeth councillor in 1968 and made chair of the housing department 2 years later. He was always on the moderate wing of the party. He married Norma Johnson, a teacher, in 1970, and with her help began the search for a constituency. At the age of 35, John Major was elected MP for the safe Conservative seat of Huntingdonshire in 1979.
I never accepted, even from my earliest age, that because I didn't come from a conventional background, I couldn't be a Conservative. Or because I didn't come from a conventional background and go to university, I couldn't get into the House of Commons. That seemed to me to be an absurdity. If the Commons was what it was originally intended to be, the Commons, then it had to be a proper balance from right across the country. And I always felt that politics was like bicycling. If you got on your bike and you kept on going, then one day, with a reasonable measure of luck, good fortune, and hard work, you would get where you wished to be.
John Major, powered by this burning ambition, now embarked on one of the most rapid rises in the history of the Conservative Party. In 1983, he became a government whip and began to be noticed. Few MPs worked so hard at cultivating friends and contacts at every level of the party.
He had a drive and a commitment and an energy which put him, as far as my own contemporaries were concerned, in a completely different league to the rest of us.
I think we can now say we are there. Cheers. Cheers.
John Major's advance was always helped by his relaxed charm, which made people from all backgrounds feel at ease in his company, especially women.
You felt that it was a genuine and sincere charm. He had, right from the beginning, that talent of making you feel, when you talked to him, that you were the only person that mattered. But I think it was true. I think he was able to absorb from people whatever he needed from them, and to give them his undivided attention.
Mrs. Thatcher, the Prime Minister, quickly came to appreciate his charming manner and approved of his diligence. Colleagues on the fringes looked on with wry amusement.
Margaret Thatcher was besotted with John Major. He was her darling, her, if she had such a thing, her toy boy. She doted on him. She promoted him very rapidly, if you look at his political career. He obviously charmed her.
In 1987, Mrs. Thatcher made him Chief Secretary to the Treasury, working for Nigel Lawson, the Chancellor. It was John Major's first cabinet job and brought him into regular contact with the Prime Minister.
He understood his brief when he went to see her. She couldn't catch him out on the details of it. And she liked all that. And of course, John has an ability through innate courtesy to appear to agree with whoever he's talking to.
And that way we may get the swiftest outcome. That seems to be very agreeable.
It's a very irritating thing when you find that he's agreed with somebody else of opposite opinions as well.
I'm sure that John Major didn't consciously deceive Mrs. Thatcher. But of course, all of us around Mrs. Thatcher knew what she liked and what she wanted, and it was very easy to echo, to some extent, echo her own thoughts, anticipate her views. You could ingratiate yourself in that way at no very great cost.
John Major was a man few in the world of politics knew really well. Although he spent time cultivating his contacts, he was always happiest at home with his books or watching cricket. He rarely discussed political ideas with Mrs. Thatcher. Indeed, she pushed him up the ladder of government so fast that she never had time to find out whether he was one of us or not.
He was moderate, one-nation conservative, had a strong social conscience, he had an understanding of social policy and the public services, which he combined with being a straightforward Tory who believed in market economics and the things we were doing. If Margaret thought he was what nowadays gets called a Thatcherite, she had misunderstood him.
John Major spent 2 years at the Treasury as Chief Secretary, the most junior position in the Cabinet. Then, in July 1989, Mrs. Thatcher summoned him to Downing Street. She had some astonishing news.
She sat there with a bloom on her cheeks. When she had a bloom on her cheeks and was looking particularly happy, then she usually had something rather grand to bestow. And the Prime Minister said to me, hold on to your seatbelt. You're the centrepiece of the reshuffle, and I would like you to be Foreign Secretary. And my heart sank.
Good morning. Good morning. What would you like me to do? Just come down to a moment.
Despite his ambition, John Major was clearly daunted. He knew nothing of foreign affairs, and at 46 was relatively young for the job. To go from being the most junior member of Cabinet to Foreign Secretary was an astonishing advance, and a clear signal that Mrs. Thatcher regarded him as a potential